Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine a figure so pivotal, so incredibly powerful that she is arguably the most important woman in the history of the Americas.
Right.
But, here's the kicker. Depending entirely on who you ask, she is either the ultimate villain or a completely misunderstood hero.
It's a heavy legacy.
It really is. I mean, we're talking about someone who was used as a weapon, who acted as a shield, and ultimately held the keys to toppling one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen.
It is a massive topic. And what makes it so sticky, even 500 years later, is just how polarized the view of her really is.
Exactly.
She is so often labeled a traitor, the woman who sold out her people. But when you actually peel back the layers, when you look at the context, you see a woman who was a brilliant architect of a new world, operating under circumstances that would break almost anyone else.
And to help us navigate this absolute minefield, we are digging into a really fascinating stack of materials today. We're doing a deep dive into the promotional material and the table of contents for Cortés and Malinche Shadow. Love, betrayal, and the fall of the Aztec Empire.
Right, which is quite a title.
Yes, it's a mood. Now, this is framed partly as a historical romance and drama, but looking at the material, it offers a very cinematic, character-driven look at the conquest. It's not just maps and dates.
And that is exactly what drew me to this source. Usually, when we learn about the fall of the Aztec Empire, the camera is focused entirely on the men.
Always.
We focus on the steel armor, the gunpowder, the politics of kings and emperors. But this material shifts the camera angle completely. It promises to tell the untold story through the eyes of Malinche, also known as Doña Marina.
Which changes everything about how you view the timeline. We aren't just looking at the battlefield anymore.
No, not at all.
We're looking at the whispers behind the throne. So our mission for this deep dive is to get into the messy stuff. The love, the betrayal, and the impossible choices. Because the source poses a really heavy question right off the bat.
It does.
Was she a traitor to her people? Or was she a brilliant strategist who secured her own survival in a crumbling world?
And that question has hung over her legacy for 5 centuries now. But to even attempt to answer it, we can't just start the clock when the Spanish arrive on the beach.
Right. We need the backstory.
Exactly. We have to understand who she was before she ever saw a European face.
And the source material paints a really vivid picture of her early life. The table of contents lists a chapter called A Princess in Chains.
Yeah.
Now, I usually associate her with being a slave, but princess. That implies a serious fall from grace.
It is a tragic fall. I mean, she wasn't born a nobody. She was born into nobility, likely in a region bordering the Aztec Empire and the Maya states. But her father died, and her mother remarried. And to ensure the family inheritance went to her new stepbrother, her own family turned on her.
Wow. So she's essentially cast out by her own blood.
Worse than cast out. She was sold into slavery.
Unbelievable.
She was traded away to Mayan merchants. So years before Cortés even lands, she has already been profoundly betrayed by her own people. She's already a survivor, having to strip away her noble identity just to stay alive in a foreign land.
See, that context changes the whole traitor label immediately for me, doesn't it?
It really complicates it.
If your own people sold you down the river, do you really owe them loyalty when a new power shows up on your shores?
That is the crucial psychological piece here. When we get to the arrival of the Spanish, what the source dramatically calls the bearded strangers, she isn't viewing this through the lens of an Aztec patriot.
Right.
She's viewing it as a marginalized woman who has been used as a pawn for years.
And speaking of pawns, let's talk about that first contact. The source has this incredible line about Cortés' arrival. It says his most powerful weapon was not steel, but a woman.
Yes?
Now, on the surface, that seems like a huge exaggeration to me. I mean, the Spanish had cannons, they had horses, gunpowder, germs. Surely all of those were more effective than one single translator.
You would think so, looking at traditional military history. But consider the situation on the ground. You have a few hundred Spanish soldiers landing on the coast of a massive, hostile, completely unknown continent.
Right.
They don't know the terrain, they don't understand the complex politics, and they cannot speak a single word of the local languages. They are flying completely blind. And steel doesn't help you if you walk right into an ambush you didn't hear about.
So she's basically the GPS.
She's much more than a GPS. She's the interface. She's the operating system.
Yeah.
And the way this happens is fascinating. The source describes it in a chapter called The Gift.
Because she was given to them.
Exactly. When the Spanish defeat a local Mayan chieftain, they are given 20 women as slaves as part of a peace offering. Malinche is just one of them.
Just one of the crowd.
Just property. She is handed over to these aliens, essentially, to grind their corn and warm their beds.
So she starts at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy all over again. How on earth does she go from grinding corn to leading an army?
It comes down to what the source calls the gift of tongues. This is the pivot point of the entire conquest. Cortés had previously found a Spanish castaway, a priest named Aguilar.
Okay.
Aguilar had been shipwrecked for years and managed to learn the Mayan language. So Cortés could speak Spanish to Aguilar, and Aguilar could speak Mayan to the locals on the coast.
That's a handy coincidence.
Very handy. But then they move further inland, right into the heart of the Aztec territory.
Where they speak Nahuatl.
Exactly. Suddenly, Aguilar is useless. He doesn't know Nahuatl. The communication chain is completely broken.
Oh, I see.
But then they realize one of the slave girls, Malinche, speaks both Mayan and Nahuatl because of her complicated childhood.
Wow, so they have to set up this crazy game of telephone.
Precisely.
Cortés speaks Spanish to the priest speaks Mayan to Malinche, and Malinche speaks Nahuatl to the Aztec envoys.
Yes, and in that incredibly fragile chain, Malinche becomes the most vital link. She elevates herself from a piece of property to a confidant and a secret strength.
That's incredible.
In a world the source describes as being full of fire and faith, language was literally the only shield she had. She made herself indispensable because without her, the Spanish are just mute tourists with guns.
Mute tourists with guns. I love that.
Yeah.
But the source suggests she wasn't just repeating words like a parrot, right?
No, not at all.
Because there's a section titled Lover and Strategist, the Unspoken Alliance. And that word strategist implies she's actively making decisions. Is she actually influencing the outcome here, or is she just translating threats back and forth?
She is absolutely influencing the outcome. You have to remember, translation is an act of interpretation. It's not a math equation. She isn't just swapping words. She's translating concepts, cultural tones, and hidden intents.
She has to filter it.
Exactly. She's explaining who these strangers are to the Emperor Moctezuma, and she's explaining the absolute godlike authority of Moctezuma back to Cortés.
So she's whispering in the court of Moctezuma, as the text puts it.
Yes.
That sounds incredibly dangerous. One wrong word, one slight mistranslation, and everyone in the room dies.
The pressure must have been unimaginable, but here's where the strategist label really earns its keep in the historical narrative. The source hints at major pivotal incidents, like the massacre at Cholula.
What happened there?
Historically, we know that when the Spanish arrived in the city of Cholula, they were actually welcomed at first. Everything seemed fine. But Malinche, because she was a woman and could move in spaces, the armed soldiers couldn't.
She was invisible to them.
Right. She befriended a local noblewoman.
She was working the room, gathering intel.
Exactly. And this noblewoman warned Malinche that she should flee the city because the Cholulans were secretly planning to ambush and slaughter the Spanish in the streets. But Malinche didn't flee. She took that critical intel straight back to Cortés.
She blew the whistle.
She did. And the result was a brutal preemptive strike by the Spanish that wiped out the Cholulan leadership.
So she's the catalyst.
Yes. That is not just translating. That is high-level intelligence work. That is active, strategic participation in a war.
See, that right there makes the traitor label stick a little more for some people, doesn't it? She actively helped kill thousands of people who were technically closer to her kin than the Spanish invaders were.
It absolutely complicates things, and the source doesn't shy away from that. But again, look at the specific alliance mentioned in the text. It's framed as a forbidden love.
Right, the romance aspect.
We cannot ignore the personal dynamic here. The source highlights that she wasn't just a valued employee, she became Cortés's lover.
Which feels so wild to me. It sounds like a romance novel trope, but this was actual history. The source talks about an undeniable bond and her being caught between loyalty to her people and this man. But I have to ask, was it really love? Or was it just pure survival? I mean, he is the ruthless conqueror. She is literally his slave. The power imbalance is off the charts.
It is the ultimate power imbalance. You literally cannot get a larger gap in power. And historians and writers have argued about this exact point for centuries.
I bet.
Was it a form of Stockholm Syndrome? Was it a highly calculated seduction on her part to secure her safety and rise in rank? The source describes it as a turbulent fusion of the old and new worlds.
The turbulent fusion?
Yeah. It suggests that regardless of exactly how the spark started, they became a genuine partnership, a deeply lethal partnership.
Lethal is definitely the right word, because as we move to the table of contents in the source material, the tone dramatically shifts from political intrigue to outright horror.
It gets very dark.
We have chapters like The March to Tenochtitlan and Feast in the Shadow of the Pyramids. The promotional material does a really great job of building that tension. You have the sheer grandeur of the capital city, the floating gardens, the massive temples, all contrasting with this creeping impending doom.
That contrast is vital to understanding the story. Tenochtitlan was larger, cleaner, and more sophisticated than almost any city in Europe at the time. The Spanish were in absolute awe.
But they were also terrified.
Beyond terrified. They were a tiny, isolated island of men surrounded by a sea of fiercely loyal Aztec warriors. They knew they were trapped.
And then the dam breaks.
Yes.
We get to the chapter, The Night of Sorrows, Betrayal and Blood. I know this is a famous historical event, the Tenochtitlan, but the source specifically frames it around betrayal. What actually happened that night?
It is chaos. Absolute, muddy, bloody chaos. The Spanish have completely worn out their welcome in Tenochtitlan. The Emperor Moctezuma is dead. The entire city has turned against the invaders.
They have to get out.
Right. They try to sneak out in the middle of the night in a torrential downpour along one of the narrow causeways. These are basically land bridges over the lake that surrounded the city.
A desperate midnight escape.
But they are spotted, the alarm is raised, the war drums start beating, and suddenly the dark lake is just swarming with Aztec canoes.
Terrifying.
The Aztecs remove the bridge sections, leaving these massive gaping holes in the causeway, and the Spanish, in their sheer greed, are weighed down by all the gold they looted from the palaces.
Oh man, greed literally pulling them underwater.
Exactly. It's a horrific image. Men drowning in the mud in the dark because they refused to drop the stolen gold. It was an absolute massacre.
How many did they lose?
Hundreds of Spanish soldiers and thousands of their indigenous Tlaxcalan allies were killed or worse, captured for sacrifice. And in the very middle of this nightmare, this night of sorrows, Malinche is there.
And she makes it out.
She survives.
She survives. And the source asks, did she betray her empire? But honestly, in that exact moment, running for her life in the dark on a rainy causeway, I highly doubt she was thinking about the grand politics of empires.
No, of course not.
She was probably just trying not to drown or get a spear in the back.
Exactly. It's about raw survival. And this directly leads to the next phase in the source. The siege. The empire cracks.
Because they come back.
They do. She helps them regroup. More importantly, she helps them negotiate with other indigenous tribes who deeply hated the Aztecs. And this is a key point the source makes, and one that often gets lost in the basic retelling.
What's that?
The Aztec Empire was not some monolithic, peaceful, happy family. It was a brutal empire that conquered, taxed, and oppressed its neighbors for human sacrifices.
Right, so when Malinche and Cortés show up at these other cities saying, hey, help us fight the Aztecs, a lot of locals probably said, where do we sign up?
Precisely. If she had been marginalized or enslaved by the regional power dynamics, helping to tear down the top of that pyramid might have looked exactly like liberation.
Or at least vengeance.
Or vengeance. Very true.
So the empire ultimately falls. Tenochtitlan is destroyed. But the source material makes a really hard pivot here. It doesn't just end with the death of a civilization, it focuses on birth.
Yes.
There's a prominent chapter called The Birth of a Mestizo Nation.
This is where her story completely transcends the war itself. After the conquest, Malinche gives birth to a son, Martin, fathered by Cortés.
Okay.
And Martin is considered one of the very first mestizos, a person of mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage.
So she is literally, biologically, the mother of a new race of people.
She is the founding mother. Period. And that is the intense duality the source keeps hammering home throughout the text.
You can't separate them.
Exactly. You cannot separate the traitor from the mother. They occupy the exact same body. She didn't just help destroy the old Aztec world. She physically, literally gave birth to the foundation of modern Mexican identity.
Man, that is heavy. Talk about a complicated legacy to leave behind.
It's unparalleled.
And speaking of legacy, the source brings up something that honestly gave me chills reading through the outline. It mentions the legend of La Llorona. Myth and malice.
Ah, yes.
Now, I grew up hearing stories about La Llorona, the weeping woman in the white dress who drowned her children and wanders the riverbanks crying for them at night.
A classic ghost story.
Right, a terrifying one. I had absolutely no idea that people connected that folklore to Malinche.
It is a fascinating, if incredibly dark, connection. The source explicitly links them to show how culture has processed the trauma of her memory.
How so?
By associating Malinche with La Llorona, folklore effectively strips away her humanity and turns her into a monster. A cursed woman who betrayed her figurative children, her people, and is now doomed to weep for eternity because of her sins.
The text uses the phrase myth and malice. It's almost like history couldn't handle the complex reality of a powerful, pragmatic woman, so it just flattened her into a boogeyman to scare kids.
That is exactly the 500 years of shadow the source refers to in its title. She stands at the absolute crossroads of history, but for centuries, she has been cast strictly, almost exclusively, as the villain.
Just one-dimensional.
Yes. In fact, the term malinchista in Mexico is still used as a deep insult today.
Really? What does it mean?
It refers to someone who prefers foreign things over their own culture. A sellout.
Ouch. So her actual name is literally a synonym in the dictionary for sellout.
Exactly. But the source material pushes back hard against that. It argues she is, quote, more than a mere footnote. It says her courage echoes across centuries. We are currently seeing a modern reevaluation where people are finally stopping to ask, what actual choices did this woman have?
That brings us perfectly to the epilogue of the source material. It's titled Between Traitor and Founder.
Right.
After looking at all of this, the childhood slavery, the desperate translation, the military strategy, the controversial motherhood, where do we actually land? What does the source want you, the listener, to take away?
I think the source intentionally forces us to land in the uncomfortable middle.
The gray area.
Always the gray area. You simply cannot simplify her. If you say she's just a traitor, you completely ignore her agency and her survival instincts in a brutal world where she was sold into slavery by her own parents.
Her point.
But on the flip side, if you say she is just a helpless victim of circumstance, you ignore her immense power. She wasn't passive. She was a major, active player on the geopolitical board.
It's just so messy.
History is always messy. We love clear-cut good guys and bad guys. We like reading Army A beat Army B because of superior tactics. But this deep dive, guided by this source, reminds us that history is so often driven by raw human relationships.
Yeah.
It's driven by emotional depth, by whispered secrets in a royal court, by a deeply complicated relationship between two people that just spiraled out and changed the face of an entire continent.
It really makes you wonder about the what-ifs, doesn't it?
Oh, constantly.
If she hadn't learned Spanish through that weird chain of priests and castaways, or if she had just decided to stay silent when she heard about the ambush in Cholula.
The Spanish almost certainly would have been wiped out early on. The Aztec Empire might have stood for another century, or maybe fallen to European diseases anyway, but the entire narrative, the entire cultural makeup of the Americas would have been completely different.
It's frankly terrifying to think one single person can tilt the axis of the world like that. You know, there was a subtitle in the promotional material that really stuck with me as I was reading it.
Which one?
Love becomes a weapon. Language is shield.
It's a striking phrase.
It sounds great on a book cover, right? Very dramatic. But when you apply it to the actual reality of her life, it's just heartbreaking. Her only defense was her voice.
It is heartbreaking, and it actually raises a final, really provocative thought for me, looking at all this material.
Lay it on me.
We always say Cortés conquered Mexico. We give him the grand historical credit or the historical blame, depending on your view.
His nub is on the statues.
Exactly. But if we follow the logic of this source material, if she was indeed the key, the master strategist, the one who actually understood the cultural landscape and the hidden politics infinitely better than he ever could.
I think I see where you're going with this.
Who actually conquered whom?
Wow.
Did Cortés just use Malinche to destroy the Aztecs? Or did Malinche use Cortés, this arrogant, bearded stranger with his strange, noisy weapons, to systematically destroy an oppressive system that she desperately wanted to escape?
That is brilliant. Did she use the weapon or was she just the weapon?
Exactly. Did she birth a completely new nation by accident while trying to survive? Or was she actively clearing the board to start the world over?
That completely turns the traditional historical narrative on its head. It gives her all the power back.
It does, and I think that is the true power of revisiting these shadows of history. When you look just a little bit closer, the people we wrote off as victims or sidekicks might actually be the grand architects.
Well, on that incredibly profound note, we are going to leave you to mull that over. Was she a traitor, a survivor, or the true mastermind of the conquest?
It's up to you to decide.
We highly encourage you to check out the source, Cortés and Malinche Shadow, and rediscover the legend for yourself. Look past the simple labels.
Absolutely. Don't just take the old history books at face value. Always look for the people hiding in the shadows.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.